What if the most strategically vital port in the Persian Gulf, a location that handles billions of dollars in oil exports every single year, suddenly fell under attack in the dead of night? What if 6 American soldiers, men and women who woke up that morning thinking about home, their families, their futures, never made it back to their bunks? And what if that attack wasn't just a random act of aggression, but a calculated, precision-executed strike that military analysts are calling one of the most daring Iranian operations in a decade? Stay with us, because what happened at Port Shuaiba is not just a breaking news story, it is a warning shot that could reshape the entire Middle East, trigger a full-scale military escalation, and drag the world's superpowers into a confrontation nobody is fully prepared for. What you are about to hear will change the way you see this conflict, and it is only getting started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Before we go any further, we want you to understand something critical. The attack on Port Shuaiba was not spontaneous. Intelligence sources, leaked communications, and satellite imagery that has only begun to surface in the last 48 hours suggest this strike was planned weeks in advance. That's right. While diplomats were shaking hands in Geneva and Washington was still debating sanctions packages, Iran was quietly positioning assets, coordinating sleeper cells, and rehearsing the most audacious military move it has executed against American forces in years. 6 U.S. soldiers are dead, dozens more are wounded, and the world is holding its breath. Let's break down exactly what happened and why this moment is unlike anything we've seen before. Port Shuaiba sits along the northwestern shore of the Persian Gulf in Kuwait, just south of Kuwait City. It is not just any port. It is one of the most heavily fortified, strategically significant logistics hubs in the entire U.S. Central Command Theater of Operations. U.S. forces stationed there are responsible for coordinating fuel supply chains, weapons transfers, and troop rotations across the entire Gulf region. Destroying or even disrupting operations at Shuaiba doesn't just kill soldiers, it fractures the logistical spine of America's Middle East presence. That is precisely why Iran chose it. This was not a random target. This was a surgical selection made by Iranian military strategists who have been studying American vulnerabilities in the Gulf for years. Now here's what the mainstream media isn't fully explaining to you yet. The attack reportedly came in waves. The first wave was a series of drone strikes, small, low-radar signature UAVs that swarmed the port's perimeter in the early morning hours, targeting watchtowers, communication arrays, and perimeter defense systems. These drones were not the crude, improvised devices we've seen in previous proxy attacks. According to early intelligence assessments, these were sophisticated loitering munitions, similar in design to the Iranian Shade series, but with upgraded guidance systems that allowed them to navigate electronic countermeasures deployed by U.S. forces on site. This speaks to a level of technological advancement from Tehran that is genuinely alarming to Pentagon planners. But the drones were just the beginning. And this is where it gets deeply disturbing. While U.S. defensive systems were engaged with the drone swarm, while radar operators were overwhelmed, while quick reaction forces were scrambling, a second wave struck. Ballistic projectiles, likely cruise missiles or precision-guided rockets, launched from positions inside Iraqi territory by Iran-aligned militia groups, hit the port's inner facilities. These weapons punched through reinforced structures. They were aimed not at open ground, not at empty warehouses, but at buildings where U.S. personnel were active. The 6 soldiers who died were caught in this second wave. Some reports indicate they were part of a rapid response team that had moved to assist colleagues during the drone chaos, meaning Iran may have deliberately used the first strike to lure American responders into the kill zone. If that is confirmed, it represents a level of tactical sophistication that U.S. military doctrine has never fully anticipated from a non-state aligned Iranian force. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't a lucky hit. This was a trap. Now let's talk about the weapon systems involved, because this is where the story of Port Shuaiba becomes a wake-up call for every defense analyst in Washington, London, Brussels, and Tel Aviv. Iran has spent the last 15 years quietly building what military planners call an anti-access area denial strategy, or A2GAD. The concept is simple but deadly. Instead of trying to match America's aircraft carrier groups and stealth bomber fleets head-on, a battle Iran could never win conventionally, Tehran has invested massively in asymmetric systems designed to deny the U.S. military freedom of movement in the Gulf region. Long-range ballistic missiles, supersonic anti-ship missiles, undersea drone swarms, and critically, an enormous network of proxy militias across Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon who can activate on command, strike American targets, and then melt back into civilian populations before any retaliatory strike can be organized. What happened at Port Shuaiba is the real world field test of that 15-year investment. And based on the early results, the strategy worked. Here's something you need to consider as we continue. The soldiers who died at Shuaiba were not just casualties of a geopolitical chess match. They were real people. They were sons and daughters, husbands and wives, men and women who volunteered to serve in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth because they believed it mattered. Their names have not yet been fully released as families are being notified, but in the coming days, those names will matter. They will become part of a conversation America is going to be forced to have about whether the current level of military presence in the Gulf is sustainable, whether the rules of engagement are adequate, and whether the intelligence failures that allowed this attack to succeed will be acknowledged or buried in classified reports that the public will never see. Because here is the intelligence failure dimension of this story, and it is enormous. Multiple sources within the defense community have indicated that signals intelligence, SIGINT, picked up unusual communications patterns in the weeks leading up to the attack. Drone traffic over the Gulf region had increased. Militia supply chains in southern Iraq showed anomalous activity, and satellite imagery flagged new positions being established within striking distance of Kuwaiti territory. So why wasn't Port Shuaiba on elevated alert? Why weren't those drones intercepted before they reached their targets? Why did 6 Americans have to die before the alarm was sounded? These are the questions that congressional oversight committees will be asking behind closed doors in the days ahead. And they are the questions that the American public, the British public, the Canadian public, and our allies across Europe deserve honest answers to. This is not a time for spin. It is a time for accountability. Now let's zoom out and look at the broader strategic picture, because Port Shuaiba does not exist in a vacuum. It is the latest and most deadly escalation in a pattern of Iranian aggression that has been building steadily for the past several months. We have seen drone strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. We have seen Houthi missile attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, attacks backed by Iranian intelligence and supplied by Iranian weapons pipelines. We have seen targeted assassinations of U.S.-aligned officials in Lebanon. And now we have seen a direct, sophisticated multi-wave assault on a major U.S. logistics hub that has killed 6 American service members on Kuwaiti soil. The question every defense analyst is now asking is Iran escalating towards something larger? Is this a provocation designed to test American resolve before a more significant operation? Or is it the opening move in a broader conflict that Tehran believes it can win, or at least survive, in the current geopolitical environment? Because here is what Iran's strategic planners may be calculating. America is politically divided. The debate over foreign military commitments is fierce and ongoing. Public appetite for another prolonged Middle East engagement is at historic lows. Iran's leadership may believe, rightly or wrongly, that Washington's response to Shuaiba will be constrained by domestic political pressures. They may be betting that airstrikes will be limited, that sanctions have already reached their maximum bite, and that the window of opportunity to assert Iranian dominance in the Gulf is now, while American political will is fractured and global attention is divided between multiple crises. Whether that calculation is correct will depend entirely on what the United States does in the next 72 hours. And that is the most important variable in this entire equation, the American response. Options on the table range from targeted retaliatory airstrikes against Iranian proxy positions in Iraq, the most politically manageable option, to direct strikes against Iranian territory itself, which would represent a massive escalation with unpredictable consequences. There is also the question of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, which remains operational in the region and represents the most powerful conventional military force within rapid deployment range. A carrier strike group of that class carries enough firepower to conduct sustained air operations against hardened targets deep inside Iranian territory. The question is whether the White House will authorize that level of force and whether doing so would trigger a broader Iranian response that could close the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day. If the strait closes, even for 72 hours, oil markets will go into freefall. Energy prices across Europe and North America will spike overnight. The economic shockwave will hit every household in America, Britain, Canada, Germany, and France. This is not a distant, abstract geopolitical conflict. The events unfolding at Port Shuaiba right now have the potential to affect the price you pay at the gas pump, the cost of goods on your grocery shelves, and the stability of financial markets within days. This is why this story matters to every single person watching this channel right now. Let's talk about Iran's broader military capabilities, because understanding what Tehran is actually capable of, not what politicians say it is capable of, but what the classified assessments say, is essential to understanding why this moment is so dangerous. Iran currently operates one of the largest ballistic missile arsenals in the Middle East. It has an estimated 3,000 or more ballistic and cruise missiles of varying range and accuracy. Its Feta 313 and Zulfiqar missiles can strike targets up to 700 kilometers away with precision guidance. Its Shihab 3 variants have a range of over 300 kilometers, putting not just Kuwait but Israel, Saudi Arabia, and U.S. bases across the Gulf within reach. And Iran has spent years building underground missile storage facilities, hardened tunnels and bunkers carved into mountain rock that can survive all but the most powerful bunker, busting munitions in the U.S. inventory. In addition to its missile arsenal, Iran's cyber warfare capabilities have been assessed by U.S. Cyber Command as a serious and growing threat. In any escalation scenario, Iranian cyber units, including the notorious APT-33 and APT-34 groups, could target critical U.S. infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, military communications networks, and even civilian internet infrastructure. A conventional military confrontation with Iran in 2026 is not the same as the Gulf War of 1991 or even the Iraq War of 2003. Iran has prepared for this moment for decades. Which brings us to the most sobering question of all. Are we already at the beginning of something we cannot easily stop? History tells us that great conflicts rarely begin with a single dramatic moment. They begin with incremental escalations, each one crossing a line that the previous generation would have considered unthinkable. Each one met with a response that pushes the threshold a little higher, until one morning the world wakes up and realizes the point of no return has been crossed without anyone ever making a conscious decision to cross it. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand did not cause World War I by itself. It was the final trigger in a system that had been building pressure for years. The attack on Port Shuaiba may or may not be that moment for the modern Middle East. But the conditions are more dangerous today than they have been at any point since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Russia and China are watching this confrontation closely. Moscow has long-standing military and energy relationships with Tehran. Beijing depends heavily on Iranian oil and has been quietly expanding its military cooperation with Iran under the framework of the 25-year China-Iran Comprehensive Strategic Partnership signed in 2021. Neither Russia nor China wants a full-scale U.S.-Iran war, but neither will actively restrain Iran if they believe the confrontation weakens American credibility and strains U.S. military resources. The geopolitical stakes of what happens next at Port Shuaiba extend far beyond the Persian Gulf. And what about Israel? Tel Aviv has been monitoring Iranian military movements with extraordinary intensity. Israel's Mossad has been running active intelligence operations against Iran's missile program, its nuclear facilities, and its proxy networks for years. If the situation escalates and Iran activates Hezbollah in Lebanon as part of a broader regional response, Israel will face a war on its northern border simultaneously with whatever is happening in the Gulf. The interconnected nature of these threat vectors means that a miscalculation in Kuwait could ignite a multi-front conflict stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean within days. We are living in one of the most dangerous geopolitical moments of the last 50 years, and most people are not paying close enough attention. Here is what you need to watch for in the coming hours and days. Watch for the official U.S. military attribution statement when Washington formally accuses Iran or its proxies of responsibility. That statement will signal how direct and how aggressive the American response is likely to be. Watch for naval movements in the Gulf. Any repositioning of carrier groups or destroyer squadrons will tell you more about U.S. intentions than any press conference. Watch for diplomatic back channels. Both Oman and Qatar have historically served as quiet intermediaries between Washington and Tehran, and if those channels go silent, it means the diplomatic off-ramp has been closed. And watch for oil prices. The oil market is the most sensitive real-time indicator of how seriously the world's financial community believes the situation is escalating. The 6 Americans who died at Port Shuaiba deserve more than thoughts and prayers. They deserve a world that takes seriously what their deaths represent. The opening of a new and deeply dangerous chapter in the confrontation between the United States and Iran. They deserve leaders who make decisions based on strategic clarity rather than political calculation. And they deserve a public in America, in Britain, in Canada, and across Europe that is informed, engaged, and paying attention, because this is not someone else's war. It never was. Stay alert. Stay informed. The developments from Port Shuaiba are moving fast, and every hour brings new intelligence, new decisions, and new stakes. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single update as this situation develops. Hit the notification bell, because when this story breaks again, and it will, you want to be the first to know. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really happening in the Gulf right now. And leave a comment below. Do you think the U.S. will respond with force, or will Washington choose restraint? Your perspective matters. The conversation starts here. Don't look away. The world is watching Port Shuaiba, and what happens next will define the next decade of global security.